Okay, so people were a little bit chafed about the Forgotten Albums minisode, and even though there were some album recommendations at the start, snuck in all stealthy-like, they were just name-dropped without any meat. So, here's some meat. To my Canadian listeners, born before 1987 or so, you're probably already familiar with a lot of these bands and albums, so I'm sorry about that. This is going to heavily assume that you're from not Canada. First, Econoline Crush, The Devil You Know. Harder rock, though probably still considered mainstream, highlights of the album include Surefire, title track The Devil You Know, and Razor Blades and Band-Aids. I don't really have a lot to say about this album, just I think it's held up well since 1998, so give it a listen, see if you enjoy it. Chaos, Yes. Slick groove hip-hop from a Toronto native, released in 2009, Yes is the fourth studio album from Chaos. Highlights include Zamboni, 4321, and the confusingly named I Wish I Knew Natalie Portman, which samples Phantom Planet's California as its backbone. A great album for long drives. The Tea Party, Transmission. Released in 1997, it's really hard for me to select highlights from this album. It's just solid from end to end. Temptation, Release, Transmission, Babylon, Emerald, Aftermath. This album was huge for me. Back at a time when Discmans were still a thing, this album routinely stayed in for days or weeks at a time. In a lot of ways, this album is a sort of polished second draft of what Tool and Nine Inch Nails were doing at the time. It's also a lot less... I don't know how to say this without sounding like a diss. I like these bands, I like Tool, I like Nine Inch Nails, but it's a lot less mopey and grim. Honestly think The Fragile if it had been recorded by Rush instead. Of all the albums on this list, this is the one most intended to be listened to as a complete thing, with unlisted tracks hidden in the pre-gap between songs and an overall consistency and flow that really rewards approaching it as a complete presentation. It's also not the most car stereo friendly, with heavy uses of silence, wide tonality, and sweeps from loud to quiet, so you might want to bust out the headphones for this one. Ohbijou, Beacons. Pop folk from a now defunct band, released in 2009, this album really is the best elements of the last decade indie wave. Mellow, lush, and personal, it's a really good trip, though the standout is hands down the track New Year. If there is any one song as part of this whole episode that I think you should check out, this is it. The Tragically Hip, Day for Night. Okay, so this one's going to seem really weird to all my Canadian viewers, like even weirder than Chaos or the Tea Party. The Tragically Hip are a Canadian institution. They've been around for 32 years, they have 14 studio albums, over 50 radio singles, they sell out arenas, and because of that, they've really become the background radiation of Canadiana. They're just there, and they've produced so much over 30 years that, like the Rolling Stones, Bob Dylan, and Aerosmith, it can be hard to think of their output as anything other than a total sum or just skimming the best off the top. And despite all that, if you're not from Canada, you are maybe just sort of barely aware that they exist. So I'm going to toss the 1994 album Day for Night into the pot here. Highlights, Grace 2, So Hard Done By, and Nautical Disaster. If you're looking for an entry point into the intimidating discography of the Hip, then this album and 1998's Phantom Power are probably your best bets. Dramarama, Cinema Verite. We'll leave off with this one, an obscure classic from 1985. A super solid mix of Brit rock, post-punk, and pre-grunge influences, this is a solid alt-rock album that never really found its foothold. I know I already said that New Year is the number one must-check out from these recommendations, but number two, by a hair's breadth, is the album highlight Anything Anything. So there you go, some recommendations. I hope that satisfies you. Thank you for watching, and as always, go in peace, my children. In the name of like, share, and subscribe. Amen.